Of ik in het beeld wil lopen voor de streamers.
Welcome everybody. I would like to introduce you Ynzo van Zanten, Choco, Evangelist, Tony Chocolonely. We are very happy to have you here today.
Nice to be here, thank you.
Take us through the story of Tony Chocolonely. Before we start, I have to say something about safety, because I think many people in the audience who come here for the first time, if we would have an emergency and we would have to evacuate, then the elevators will not work anymore, then we can follow Marianne. Marianne is one of our BHV'ers. If you follow the signs in this back, in that corner, there's a door that goes outside to the emergency stairway. That's the one we should use, unless the fire's over there, of course, but that's the one we should use to go down. Because in that one there is overpressure that blow in fresh air, so you can go down safely. So please be aware of that. So welcome. We're looking forward to the story of Ynzo. Also welcome to our audience via the webcast. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So hello, my name is Ynzo, and I'm the chief evangelist of Tony Chocolonely, which probably means I have the best job in the world, even though I had a brief history at KLM. And why is that? Because I get away with talking about chocolate all day long. And the fact that I have the best job in the world is definitely confirmed by my children of 9 and 11, whose friends, for some strange reason, all come and play at our place. And I hope it has something to do with the education of my kids, but I think it has more to do with the amounts of chocolate I have in my basement. But so chocolate. Chocolate is a magical product, isn't it? Chocolate, I say at home sometimes, is the solution to just about everything. Yeah, you had a crappy week, you arrive at KLM and the electric charging station doesn't work for your car. Or for some reason, that's strange by the way, there's a charge pole downstairs that has 2 outlets, but there's only 1 space for electric cars. Interesting. Have a look at that one. Or paint, I'll come by with a bucket of green paint maybe someday. So you had a crappy week, right? And there's only one way to fix that, right? It's a good bar of chocolate. Or maybe you had a great week. Yeah, your husband or wife was amazingly nice to you. Your children were writing poetry in the corner. It's storytelling, huh? And the sun was shining all week long, and there were no fires in the staircases of KLM. So just a great week. There's only one product to really celebrate that amazing week. It's a bar of chocolate. So it's the solution to just about everything. So you recognize that moment that you rip open a full bar of chocolate. They've been counted, eh? And you're ready to rumble, and you bite over a chunk of chocolate and it melts in your mouth. And you're just right there in your happy zone, right? Everything is fine. You're right there. And the last thing that you want, you like dark chocolate? Go for it. The last thing you want is to remember that one moment that at the KLM digital studio there was this one guy from Tony's who told you about the bitter side of chocolate. Because there's a dark side to the story of Choco. And it's my job to tell you about that. Now I have good news and bad news for you today. The good news is that you're all going home with a bar of chocolate. Yeah, this is my Oprah Winfrey moment, and you get chocolate, and you get chocolate. The bad news is though that chocolate comes with a tiny price. And that price is called knowledge, awareness. And so if you don't want to bear any form of responsibility in your life, this is a perfect moment to just walk out and leave through the staircase, following procedures. But if not, stay put, but then you bear the price of knowledge. Because how does the value chain of cocoa look? Cocoa grows on trees around the equator. There's a little bit of cocoa that comes from Asia, a little bit of cocoa that comes from Central and South America, where originally cocoa comes from. But the vast majority of all cocoa comes from Western Africa, from millions of tiny plantations, farms in Western Africa. On the other side of the value chain, there's billions of consumers like you and I who just want to be able to eat a bar of chocolate every single day in your life without any sense of guilt. In the middle of that value chain, there's only a handful of companies that actually produce chocolate from cocoa. These are Cargill, Callebaut, Mars, Hershey's, Nestlé, Mondelez, Meiji, and perhaps someday Tony Chocolonely. The problem is right there, because there's only a handful of companies, and it's in their favor to have a low world price of cocoa. They keep the price low even, and we believe that's inhumanely low. Because how does that look? Of a bar that's sold in the Netherlands for about €2.65 in the store, not much more than about 12 cents actually end up in the hands of the farmer growing the cocoa. Now these cocoa farmers grow on average about 1,000 kilos of cocoa. And with a world price last year of €1.30 per kilo, that means they have a revenue of about 1,300 euros per year. With a wife and on average 4 kids in Ivory Coast, that means they live off about 60 cents available income a day, which is well below the poverty level of $2 per person a day. And that poverty leads to horrible situations. So, from 2 countries in Western Africa, Ivory Coast and Ghana, comes about 60% of all cocoa in the world. And that's grown on about 2.5 million farms. Now that wasn't easy for us to find out because they don't go to the Chamber of Commerce to subscribe themselves. But Tulane University did this for us, the research. There's about 2.5 million cocoa farms in Ghana and Ivory Coast alone. On those cocoa farms, there's about 2.3 million children that work there. And if these kids would go to school and come home, pick up some cocoa pods from the ground, help mom and dad create a little bit of revenue on the farms, that will be fine for us. But unfortunately, that's not reality. Because in reality, about 90% of these children work under illegal circumstances. They work with chemicals, heavy machinery, very sharp machetes, and don't get to go to school. And the worst case, about 90,000 kids get subject to human trafficking and are totally exploited. You can buy a child for about $250, $300 in Ivory Coast and put him to work as a piece of machinery. Now these are statistics, but I'd like to introduce you to a couple of these boys.
Je suis Kamsame Félix, j'ai 16 ans. J'ai travaillé dans une plantation de cacao de 1999 en 2003.
Je m'appelle Kamkoy Herman, j'ai 18 ans. J'ai travaillé à la plantation de cacao 1999 en 2003.
Je m'appelle Kam Touré, j'ai 18 ans. J'étais travaillé dans la plantation en 1999.
Je n'étais pas payé, j'étais forcé de travailler.
J'étais forcé de travailler. Je n'avais pas la liberté pour quitter l'école.
On ne m'a pas payé, on m'a forcé de travailler.
Et puis on ne vous laisse jamais causer entre parents. Si on te voit causer avec ton parent, bon, on te tue ou bien, tu te mates très bien là, et puis on te fait changer de compte.
C'est fini, madame?
Now what you just saw was Kam Felix, who's being asked to sign a witness statement that was written down, which I'll come back to later. And he's told, if you don't have a signature, just jot down your first name. But Kam Felix can't read or write, so he puts down a little cross, and he's utterly ashamed of it. These boys are robbed of their whole childhood and frankly of their whole future as well. And at the age of about 7, 8, or 9, they get lured away from neighboring countries like Burkina Faso and get told that they can work in Ghana or Ivory Coast to earn some money, and they learn to become a professional cocoa farmer, but they just disappear. Now, if you realize that in the middle of that value chain that I told you about, there's only a handful of companies that actually own this problem, you could also think then that problem is easily solved, right, with just a dozen of companies who are responsible for that problem. And in the same line of thought, there were two US senators, Senator Harkin and Senator Engel, that in 2001 thought the same thing. So they jotted down the Harkin-Engel Protocol, which was meant to eradicate the worst forms of child labor in the cocoa industry within a time frame of 10 years' time. The Harkin-Engel Protocol was signed by all CEOs of those companies in the middle of that value chain. Not just on behalf of their companies, but also in their own personal name. So you'd think, you're there, right? Unfortunately, the Harkin-Engel Protocol was a so-called non-binding agreement. Now, if the world would stick together with non-binding agreements, we wouldn't get anywhere, right? So, in 2005, there was a Dutch television show called Keuringsdienst van Waarde, an investigative program that looks at the reality behind the nonsense of marketing. Let me put it in one sentence. And the journalist Teun van de Keuken was looking into the progress of the Harkin-Engel Protocol. And Teun realized that nothing had changed in the cocoa industry, that actually nothing had been done towards any form of change within the cocoa industry. None of the producers were actually taking responsibility. And Teun is a television journalist, and unfortunately not too many companies wanted to talk to him. Here's a little clip of the head of PR of Nestlé globally.
Slavery exists.
Oh yeah?
Clearly.
Because
Because they are so desperately poor.
because they don't get paid enough by Nestlé or by the companies they
All
work
right,
for.
that's it. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Global head of PR. Now, if you don't know Teun van de Keuken personally, let me help you. He's the kind of Dutch guy that gets impressively angry within 2-3 minutes. And Teun was standing outside of the gates of Callebaut in Belgium, the biggest fluid chocolate producer in the world, and they didn't want to speak to him. Teun didn't have any footage of anybody talking to him, so he had an issue. So Teun figured, let me turn the cards around. And what Teun did is he put a camera on himself and he ate 10 different bars of chocolate and called 911. 112, 112. And he said, I'm a chocolate criminal because I'm financing child slavery in the chocolate industry. Because I just ate bars of 10 different brands of which I'm sure that there's child slavery in there somewhere. And he wasn't really taken seriously, so the lady said, why? And he said, well, if I'd buy a relatively cheap bicycle in the Vondelpark in Amsterdam at the end of the afternoon from a guy who doesn't smell that relatively good, then I can rest assured that that's a stolen bicycle and I'm responsible for the theft of that bicycle. If I'm aware of criminal activities within the value chain of a product that I'm buying, I'm responsible for those criminal activities. It's called fencing, hailing in Dutch. So I'm responsible for child slavery in the chocolate that I ate, so you have to come and arrest me. Well, Teun still wasn't taken seriously, so he hired an expensive lawyer, for whom this was a first too, because normally they get asked to keep people out of jail. And Teun wanted to go into jail and set up a court case against himself. Why? His thinking was, I can't go and sue the Nestlés and the Hershey's and the Marses of this world because they will grind me down with lawyers within a day and I don't have the money. But if I sue myself, they just have to stand by and watch what happens. And so Teun had a court case set up against himself. And in a court of appeal, in the end, the judge said, morally, you're completely right. But legally, I can't convict you. Why? Because one, I'd have to put every Dutchman in jail because we all eat chocolate. And two, more importantly, I can't prove the causality, the direct relationship between the beans that were picked by Kam Herman from the movie who was flown in as a witness and the chocolate that you ate. We didn't know at that time, and little do people know, that if you buy a 100% fair trade bar of chocolate, you can't be sure that there's 100% fair trade cocoa beans used in that bar of chocolate, because cocoa is a mass balanced product. All cocoa beans in the world, whether fair trade certified or not, get thrown onto a big heap, and on the other side of the heap, chocolate producers buy cocoa beans and produce chocolate. Now, this is very convenient for them because it gives them the opportunity to hide behind a huge heap and not look at the horrors at the other side of the heap. And they can also wash their hands in innocence, always saying, we don't know if there's child slavery in our cocoa beans because we don't know where our cocoa beans come from. And we thought that was ridiculous. But Teun didn't have footage, and he didn't have this court conviction. So Teun figured, well, then I'm just going to start and change the system from within. And he started the chocolate brand Tony's Chocolonely. Tony's, the international name for Teun, and Chocolonely for his lonely battle in the chocolate industry. We weren't too familiar with the customs within the chocolate industry when we launched our first chocolate bar. And that's why our first bar, which was milk chocolate, we launched in an alarming color, which is red. Which is a total mind mess for any Dutchman because they always expect dark chocolate in a red wrapper. So when we then launched our dark chocolate, we put it in a blue wrapper to make it completely a mess for people. Interesting for you guys to know that this has always been an absolute mindfuck for any Dutchman. And last year, the best known Dutch chocolate brand, Verkade, changed their colors around from blue-red as well. So we call that making an impact. So a tiny company was born, but with a huge mission. To not only make our own chocolate 100% slave-free, but to make all chocolate worldwide 100% slave-free.
Ja, goedemiddag.
Goedemiddag, is dit Alain de Laat?
Jawel.
Meneer de Laat, u spreekt met Teun van de Keuken uit Nederland.
Jawel.
Weet u nog wie ik ben?
Ja, ik weet wie u bent.
Nou, ik heb een tijdje geleden bij u allemaal chocola gekocht, hè?
Ja, dat klopt.
En we zijn vanochtend begonnen met de verkoop.
Ja.
En u moet eens even raden hoeveel we er hebben verkocht.
Oh, 1000?
13.000.
13.000?
Ja.
Oei, dan heeft u een probleem, hè?
We had only made 5,000 bars. That's why this was a bit of a problem. Anyway, we're a tiny company, but in December last year we became market leader in the Netherlands over Côte d'Or and over Milka, which we're really proud of. And even though we're a tiny company, we really strongly believe in this mantra by the founder of The Body Shop, Anita Roddick, who once said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sharing a room with the mosquito. And we're the mosquito in the chocolate industry, constantly buzzing and stinging and annoying people and hopefully keeping them awake at night. So how do we do this? Our strategy is a three-step strategy. First of all, is to create awareness. And what do we mean by that? Well, we believe that if consumers and retailers, hand in hand, simply demand more sustainably produced chocolate, then the producers will automatically have to follow suit. And we want to create issue awareness. So we hardly measure any brand awareness anymore. What we now measure is issue awareness. Do people know about the issue of child slavery within the chocolate industry? And that's why we come by at Schiphol-Oost and tell these stories. Now, I have a 9-year-old son and a 10-year-old son, sorry Tom, since last week, and 11-year-old daughter, and my daughter always talks about her BFFs. Do you know what a BFF is? It's your best friend forever. And I always thought you had 1 or 2 BFFs, but all her friends are her BFF. So at Tony's we talk about our SFFs, our serious friends forever. We want chocolate lovers to know about the issue in the chocolate industry and then decide for themselves. The second step in our strategy is to lead by example. We want to show chocolate industry and other companies that it's possible to have a viable business case, business model, a profitable business model in a more sustainable and responsible manner. Now, for us, being profitable isn't a goal. For us, making a profit is merely a mean towards a goal. The goal is 100% slave-free chocolate worldwide. Now, the banks don't always agree with our profit margin, but we think it's enough. And the rest goes back to where it belongs, which is the farmers in the beginning of the value chain. Now, how do we do this? First of all, to have traceable beans, to really take responsibility for your value chain and to know where your beans come from. So our beans have been fully traceable, the cocoa mass since 2012, because we source directly from 5, 6 corporations in Ghana and Ivory Coast, which entails about 5,000 to 6,000 farmers that we buy our beans from. And then they go into the value chain of Barry Callebaut, which is the biggest producer of chocolate in the world. And why Ghana and Ivory Coast? Because the problem is biggest there. Sometimes you'll see other bars that talk about slave-free cocoa beans. Then have a good look where the beans come from. It's great if it comes from the place where the problem is the greatest. It's not so great if it comes from a place where there's no problem of child slavery, for example, South America. Fully traceable beans in a business where they said it's impossible. Yeah, because they said it's a mass balance product, it's been done like this for hundreds of years, you cannot make a difference. In 2012 we established the cocoa mass to be fully traceable, and since 2015 all our cocoa products, also the cocoa butter, which I'll come back to later. Secondly, we pay a higher price to the farmers because we are fair trade certified, but fair trade isn't enough. It's great, but it isn't enough. Fair trade gives them about a 10% premium on top of the farm gate price, which is established by the governments of Ghana and Ivory Coast. And we pay about 25 to 30% premium on top of that. And this year even more because the cocoa prices unfortunately have plummeted. And why do we do this? Because we want these farmers to reach a so-called living income, which means you're able to feed yourself and your family, you're able to send your kids to school, to invest a little bit in your farm and be a happy camper. Thirdly, we believe in long-term relationships. These farmers are afraid to invest in their farms and they tend to have old trees and old practices. Why? Because they have about a time span of half a year to a year guarantee that they can sell their cocoa beans. We tell them once you're working with us, together with us, then we'll guarantee you a 5-year time span that we'll buy your cocoa beans. And why 5 years? Because it takes about 5 years from a little sapling to become a cocoa pod producing cocoa tree, so they can replenish their farms in that time. And it's not an exclusive deal. So we even encourage them to sell their beans to more buyers because we don't want them to be fully dependent on Tony Chocolonely. Now, fourthly, we help them to create better quality cocoa beans and a higher yield on their farms. Sometimes they have about 400 kilos per acre, and we try to get them up to at least 800 kilos per acre. And a couple of weeks ago I was in Ivory Coast where I spoke to a farmer who reached almost 2,000 kilos per acre already. And lastly, we help these farmers to form corporations and to have these corporations managed properly. So we give them training. Why? To have them reach a stronger voice in that value chain, in that hourglass model, and to be able to stand up to these buyers in the middle of the value chain. Now this is our recipe for slave-free cocoa. Our third step in our strategy is to inspire other companies to act. Other companies to not only copy our business model, but even improve our business model. We say go for it. Yeah? We say either we need to reach 100% market share, which is a bit of a hard deal in the whole world of chocolate, or to have the whole world embrace our business model and 100% of the world use our business model, which we believe would be fine. So we're happy if people copy us. Now, sometimes copying of Tony Chocolonely is a bit I don't know whether last year you saw the repositioning of the Delicata bars in Albert Heijn, unequally divided for some reason, same kind of paper, same kind of colors, or the amount of bars that now have caramel sea salt in them, which we launched a couple of years ago, is by far the biggest selling bar that we have. It's not the whole kind of copying that we think they should do. So we invited Verkade to come by and to also copy our business model, and they happily agreed for a meeting pretty soon. What we do like though is that we have our chocolate produced by Barry Callebaut, which is the biggest chocolate producer in the world. And why? Because we want our business model to be scalable for competition as well. And if Callebaut can do it, then anybody can do it. Now Callebaut invested 1.6 million euros in their factory last year to install this tank. This is a huge dedicated cocoa butter tank, because after the cocoa mass, of which the industry said it's impossible to make fully traceable, we said we also want our cocoa butter to be fully traceable. It comes from the same cocoa beans, so we want that premium to be able to go to the farmers at the beginning of the value chain. But the industry said, yeah, but cocoa butter doesn't taste like anything. It's just fat. So these big producers pump cocoa butter through their factories, which is just generic cocoa butter. And we wanted our own cocoa butter from our own farmers. And so they installed this tank, so that's possible. Of course, we branded the hell out of the thing, but that's what we like. Now, we could have become an NGO. We could have become an activist, but we actively decided to become an enterprise, a business, a viable business. And how do we do this? We say we're crazy about chocolate and serious about people. Now, we're pretty damn crazy about chocolate. If you look back about 15 years, all the chocolate you could get was like milk chocolate, dark chocolate, and sometimes a bit of nuts in there, but that was it. Not too many people made a stracciatella bar or a bar with popcorn and disco dip, let alone a bar. Well, a nice little anecdote. A while ago, I was standing in our kitchen, because the first thing you see when you go into our office, that's our kitchen, and Eva is all day long producing the weirdest type of recipes. And we get to make our own chocolate bars. And you get to sprinkle in anything you want, as long as it's not peanuts, drugs, or booze. So a colleague next to me was cutting up crispy bacon and marshmallows. And I was like, ew. But I went, ew, just a bit too soon, because Eva started giggling next to me. And she opened her secret fridge of samples, and she pulled out a milk chocolate, crispy bacon, and maple syrup crystals sample. And it was just gobsmacking delicious. So maybe someday, but then probably with turkey bacon to make it halal or something, we'll see. So we're really crazy about chocolate. Anytime you come to our office at the Westergasfabriek here in Amsterdam, you never walk out without chocolate. That's our rule of thumb. So we have the happiest postman in the world, I can tell you. But we're serious about people. Our number one in the list of seriousness is our own team, which perhaps is slightly narcissistic, but we believe we can only reach that humongous goal of 100% slave-free chocolate with the most motivated, inspired people in our own team. Now, we work really hard. There's only 70 people, of which about 6 in Portland, Oregon in the US, and the rest in Amsterdam. But we've become market leader. But how do we do this? Well, by keeping people as happy as possible. So our work environment is amazing. The lunch that we get at the office needs to be better than what you could get outside of the office. That's our rule. A perk of working at Tony's is that you get to take away as much chocolate every day as you can physically carry. Pretty nice. And to help you run off that chocolate again, you get free running shoes every year. And we have a BMI bonus. You know what a body mass index is? Well, the BMI bonus was a bit nah for some people. So now from this year, we turn it around into a maintain your BMI bonus. We have minimum holidays, not maximum holidays. So you have to take 28 holidays a year, and your manager needs to make sure that you take at least 28 holidays, and it's unlimited. And being ahead of Dutch politics, we think it's an absolute insult for fathers to have 2 days off when you have a child. And now they're thinking about changing it to 5 days. Woo! So we give a month paid holiday to any male who gets a son, and we don't believe in discrimination, so we added a month to the ladies as well. If you become pregnant, not too many employers like that. We love it. We applaud it. If you get a child at Tony's, you get 1,000 euros cash in your hand on the date of birth. And if you make a child within Tony's with somebody else within Tony's, you each get 1,000 euros. That's our incentive for the Friday afternoon drinks. If you have anything to celebrate at Tony's, you run up the stairs and there's a big red alarm button right there. If you whack that button, then all the disco lights go off and the logo starts flashing and everybody starts cheering for you. Nobody has any clue why, but everybody's happy. And that made us the best employer of the Netherlands 2 years ago, of which we were really proud. So on number one, our own team. On number two of the list of serious, obviously the farmers that we work with, that we create long-term relationships with. It's about 5,000 to 6,000 farmers at the moment, and hopefully it grows as exponentially as our own growth of the company. Number three is consumers. If you buy Tony's Chocolonely, we have the Choco phone, which is one number. And if you buy Tony's Chocolonely, if you call Tony's Chocolonely, you never get this switchboard that says press 1 to speak to a human being, press 2 if you're really sure, and press 3 if you don't mind waiting 20 minutes, or send us a tweet. Anyway, now you get to speak to Paul or Keisha, my office managers. And if Paul and Keisha are both occupied, all the phones in the whole company ring at the same time. and we just have to pick up that phone. Number 4 is the people that buy our bars, which is the retailers. Those are our customers. So just about all retailers in the Netherlands at the moment, and Delhaize in Belgium, Whole Foods in the US, etc. And number 5 is the people that make our bars. So that's Barry Callebaut, who makes the chocolate, and Kim's and Althea's are the factories that then make bars out of the chocolate, and then the people who make the packaging of our chocolate. That's our list of series about people. Now, if you hear this story about how unequally divided the value chain of cocoa is, isn't it weird to realize that all chocolate bars in the world for centuries have always had this impressively boring Excel spreadsheet shape? And if you're a really boring chocolate brand, and I don't like to slag off competition, but if you believe in purple cows, then you also put your brand name on each and every block individually, just in case the consumer might forget halfway through the bar of what brand he's eating a chocolate bar. Now, there's no market research that you can do that will tell you that it's a good idea to make your bar unequally divided, but we did. Because we don't do too much market research, we believe in gut instinct. But when we launched our unequally divided chocolate bar, the phone was ringing off the hook, internet was exploding, and our inbox was full of complaints. There was this example of a mother who sent us an email. She said, "My kids used to live in perfect harmony." And then you launched this chocolate bar. Now I have one of 10 and one of 11, and even those two are constantly bickering about who has the biggest block of chocolate, because no block has the same size as a different block. Well, that's the solution. That's exactly what we told that lady. We said the solution is to just give each of them a whole bar, which isn't good parenting, but it was a good answer though. But what we did, on a more serious note, we tried to get in touch with all of these people who had a complaint, and we explained them why we made our bar unequally divided. Because at Tony's we don't do paid media. You've never seen a Tony's ad. So the bar tells the story of the unequally divided value chain of cocoa in its purest form. It's a discussion piece. You open a bar of chocolate with somebody who knows nothing about Tony's Chocolonely, you immediately explain why it's unequally divided. And if you're not sure about why that is, then we print the reason on the inside of the wrappers as well, which is like Sustainability 1.0, print double-sided. Yeah, that was going to save the planet. Well, we're printing on the inside of our wrappers to explain the story of the unequally divided value chain of cocoa. What not too many people know though, but now you guys and the people watching at home will know, is that we hid the map of Western Africa in our chocolate bars. So, and here comes a little story that you can tell at home, which is true. We're talking about Ghana and Ivory Coast, and then we hop to the right. We talk about Nigeria and Cameroon. And in the middle, there's two completely sovereign independent states called Togo and Benin. But when we launched our unequally divided chocolate bar, we realized we had a problem. Because at Tony's, we truly love whole hazelnuts. And neither in the block of Togo nor in the block of Benin would fit a whole hazelnut. So we had a long political discussion in the office, because we have them of all political colors in the office. And we talked, should we respect our love for the whole hazelnut and just join Togo and Benin into one block of chocolate? Or should we respect the sovereignty of Togo and Benin and start crushing up our hazelnuts like our competitors do? Well, as you now know, the hazelnut won this battle. And we just don't tell this story in Western Africa too often. Now, this is, in a nutshell, how we believe a small company can actually make a dent in an old rusted down industry, in our case, the cocoa industry.
Het is toch een bewijs dat je wel het verschil kan maken.
Je moet ergens beginnen, je moet niet nadenken, je moet gewoon beginnen. Iedereen kan gewoon zijn eigen Tony zijn. Dat is natuurlijk ook het verhaal van deze reep.
Now, as I said in the beginning of this talk, I said the chocolate you're taking home comes with a price. And Sartre once said, once you know something, you can't unknow something. And once you know something, you're responsible. And once you're responsible, it's up to you to act or not. So, next time you have a week that you feel needs celebrating, or you have a week that's been so crappy that you feel you deserve to eat a whole bar of chocolate within 5 minutes, then just realize that any purchase you make is a vote for the world you want to live in. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? Questions? When do I get my chocolate?
You mentioned the price of one child slave. I didn't hear the price exactly. What was it?
250 to 300 US dollars. Yeah. Yeah. The question was, in the beginning of my talk, I talked about the price that you can actually employ or get or obtain a child slave in Ivory Coast, which is about 250, 300 US dollars. Yeah.
Where are the bars actually produced?
The bars are produced in Belgium. So it makes it great for me when I do a talk in Belgium, because it's weird for a Dutch guy to step into the holy trinity, or how do you call it, the holy center of chocolate making, as they think in Belgium. So I always start with you guys making. So the chocolate is produced by Callebaut, the biggest chocolate producer in the world. And the bars are then also made in Belgium by Kims and Altayas. Sorry? The packaging, I'm not sure about the packaging itself, where it's produced. It's put on in Belgium, at least.
Now you've created chocolate bars. Any plans on moving or expanding beyond chocolate bars to anything else that contains?
Yeah, I'm repeating the question for the people at home. So any plans in expanding into different categories, for example? Never say never at Tony's. Yeah, because, for example, we're now hoping to open a factory within 1 or 2 years. And the factory needs to have a roller coaster in it, we said. Because it only is fun to go to a factory when there's a roller coaster in it. And there's no fun to go into any factory. And we haven't thought about that a couple of years ago. We have chocolate milk at the moment, for example. We're thinking about chocolate sprinkles. We once had chocolate sprinkles for a while, hagelslag. But we have so much to do in the world of just bars of chocolate still. And we are really focused on making a difference in the cocoa industry. And the biggest cocoa count that we can actually sell is in a chocolate bar, because there's not too much cocoa in chocolate milk or cocoa in chocolate sprinkles. It's mostly sugar in chocolate sprinkles, for example. So yes and no. There's much to do in many industries. There's child slavery in shipping industry, in cotton industry, in fashion industry. So we'd love to do something about that. We even love to do more about the ingredients that we already source that's also put into a chocolate bar. But the main focus is cocoa.
I was wondering, as you are growing and growing, how do you maintain that in Western Africa it stays fair? How can you keep control of that as your company grows and as the production grows?
So how do we maintain or even check the fairness of the cocoa farmers in Ghana and Ivory Coast? A couple of ways. We're fair trade certified, which is important to us, even though we're also the mosquito in the fair trade world, because we believe they could do a lot more. But we're loyal, so we're sticking to fair trade for now. That's one way. The second is that we're there. And it sounds obvious, but it's amazing to us that often in Ghana and Ivory Coast, we speak to people and they have never seen anybody from the bigger chocolate brands, because they buy the cocoa from the world market. And we're constantly represented in Ghana and Ivory Coast there. There's people that live there from Tony's. That's one way. Third is to really, really build strong relationships with the corporations, equal, open, friendly relationships with them. And that takes a while, relationship building. And then fourthly, there's independent checks that are being done, whether you're bigger or not, and also our own audits that we do there on the ground. We also work, for example, together with Nestlé in the International Cocoa Initiative, and the International Cocoa Initiative is launching the CLMRS, which is the Child Labor Monitoring and Remediation System, which is actually a system on the ground to check and to be able to monitor child labor in there. And we're combining that with our traceability platform that we build ourselves, the Bean Tracker, that we open to competition to put in their own value chain of beans. So there's many ways that we check it. I would say the most important is to really maintain those strong relationships on the ground.
So last summer I was in San Francisco and I found a Tony's bar in a store there. So I was quite surprised and I was wondering, how did you end up in the US, and is it like a Was it the first time you were expanding to other countries, or are you selling in a lot of?
Yeah, no, nice question, because it gives me a little bridge. We want to create impact. So for us, revenue, profit is only, and growth is only important for us to be able to reach impact. And the biggest impact we can reach is by having other chocolate producers follow suit. See that we're successful, see that it can be done, see us prove that it can be done, and then follow suit. Now, we often say that if you want people to listen to you, you'd better make noise in their backyard. And the backyard of at least 3 of the biggest chocolate producers is the US. So Holland isn't that big, and we're not so big on chocolate consumption either. So when we talked about expansion, and when we also reached market leadership in the Netherlands, then automatically your curves start flattening. So we said, what better country to go to than the US? So the first country we expanded into was the US, from Portland, Oregon. So it's like Asterix and Obelix all the way in the corner of the US. But it's a great launch place because they're really conscious and really conscious foodies over there. So US, we had a problem fulfilling in the beginning. So we had 2 people on the floor, but we couldn't get bars over there. Now that's completely been fixed, the whole value chain. So now we're really ramping up quickly in the US, as stuff can go quickly in the US. So Whole Foods is now going to sell us nationally in the US. And we have a sales lady in Staten Island on that coast as well. So if you combine East Coast, West Coast, there's about 150 million consumers there. Now, if you extrapolate, say, 50 million Dutch people in the current market that we have now, we could have at least 10 times the market in the US. But we're also expanding in Scandinavia at the moment, we're present, in Belgium, and this year we're now launching in Germany and France. And then the next big one will be the UK.
The UK is a big consumer of chocolate.
Yeah. But we've always said we want to have a presence in maximum 2 countries, own presence, so we're present in the US, present in Holland, and the rest is done through distributors. And we want to be able to be present in the UK as well. So once the US is really up and running, then we can go and conquer the UK. Formerly European Union.
I hear you being sort of critical about fair trade, and I was wondering where that comes from.
Yeah, we're critical about just about anything. One of our core values is critical. And that means critique to ourselves, critique amongst ourselves, and also letting in critique externally. But also buzzing like a mosquito out there. Now, fair trade is fine, and it's great. The organization is a bit slow, though, and a bit bureaucratic. But we're sticking to them because the origins are really Dutch. Fairtrade Max Havelaar was the only means for us to have sustainable cocoa in the beginning of our existence. But the whole growth of fair trade in the Netherlands at the moment is through the growth of Tony's, which we believe is wrong because they should be able to grow through different categories themselves. But this is typical of who we are, you know, we're stinging, we're buzzing, but we're also helping. So Nestlé, our competitor, we also work with them in the International Cocoa Initiative. That's the way we were born. We were journalists once.
A question about resistance, because I can imagine the bigger you get, the more resistance probably.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how did you manage just in the getting things started phase, and is there still resistance, and how do you handle it?
Yeah. I think we went faster than the resistance could overtake us. Yeah. Now, a wise man from India once said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. Yeah, which was Gandhi. And we're maybe entering the then they'll fight you stage. Because they laughed for a while, but now we're market leader in the Netherlands. So they stopped laughing quickly. And what we see is that they're not specifically fighting us, but copying us, which is fine because unlike many other companies, that's part of our strategy. So I think by being such an embraceable and huggable brand for consumers, it's made it almost impossible to really fight us. You know, we're mission driven, we're not profit driven. So You can fight us on the profitability part. We don't care. You know, we're mission driven. We want to reach a point. And if you want to join us, go for it. You know, and they're not used to that. So anybody who's copying us without copying the business model, we just invite them over and we tell them how they can join us. And they tend to like that. They tend to listen. Because we're also nice to competitors. So they get free coffee at our place.
What can you tell about the results so far? In terms like, okay, how are the farmers doing? What improvements?
Our results in Africa.
Yes. What do you have achieved?
Yeah. Well, the amount of certified traceable cocoa beans has grown as fast as our revenue has grown. But I want to really put things in perspective because we work with 5,000-6,000 farmers at the moment. And I said in the beginning, there's about 2.5 million farms alone in Ghana and Ivory Coast. So we're a drop in the ocean over there. Even though we're market leader in the Netherlands and everybody loves us and eats us, there's a long way to go over there. And that's exactly why we want to have competition join us and Nestle join us, etc., etc. Now, what has been achieved? It's a slow process. And that's something that we really need to realize. I was in Ivory Coast a couple of weeks ago and my colleague said, Ynzo, don't expect white little cottages with rose gardens around it, at the farmers that we work with. But what I did see were farmers that were proud of their business, that were fairly paid at the moment, that had financial management help, that had help through the corporations. I saw corporations that really had professionalized, that could help the farmers, that could really make economies of scale possible for these farmers. I saw farmers that had increased the yield on their farms. So it's a very long way because it's the 5-step recipe that you really need to tackle at the same time. And it's not something, it's a systemic change that we need over there. Because it's been wrong for hundreds of years. So it takes a long while to really make a totally visible impact. Because you can't measure pride. And you see that has changed. What we can measure is the tonnage of cocoa beans that we buy from these farmers. They get a premium of 30 to 40% on top of the farm gate price. So yes, you see a difference, but I don't want to go boquito on that because it takes a while. It takes a long while, and we haven't been there for more than a decade.
And you also mentioned the ecological impact of improving the yield, because productivity raise most times goes at the cost of...
Yes and no. The question is, do you also keep in mind at least the ecological aspect? Yes, definitely. Our whole sourcing strategy is very focused on that, even though we really want to help these farmers to raise their yield. We have a corporation, for example, that's also organically certified. That doesn't change anything about productivity, it even diminishes it slightly, and anything about child labor. And that's our focus. But, for example, through composting means of the cocoa pods when they're opened, they can actually have an increased yield with a lower ecological footprint. We actually help them use fertilizers more efficiently. We want to diminish the amount of fertilizers that they use, but we don't want to take away all forms of fertilization because they need it to increase the yield on their farms. But there's very simple tips and tricks that you can teach them. For example, with the climate change discussion, these trees, cocoa trees, like shade. They like even more shade now, so we help them grow shade trees amongst their plantations. We also teach them that if you take away the leaves from the ground, the moisture evaporates more quickly. So leave the leaves on the ground, which is a great seal for moisture in the ground, etc., etc., etc. Cocoa pods contain potassium, and if potassium is concentrated in one place too heavily, it poisons the ground. What they do though, they sit around like this and they open up together, singing, chatting, the cocoa pods, and they leave the pods on the ground. So it becomes a poisoned place. We help them spread it or, for example, compost it. So there's many ways. So yes, definitely, we have a strong eye on ecological change in Ghana and Ivory Coast as well. But it's not our main focus. Our main focus is eradicating forced child labor in the value chain of cocoa. Do you have a different interpretation of the question? Go for it.
I thought in terms of ecological or sustainable production is not just in the countries that where the cocoa is grown, but also like how you make the wrappers, how you...
Oh yes, no, but same thing goes for that. Our sourcing strategy goes for where we source any ingredient. So there's our milk powder comes from 36 countries at the moment. Sugar comes from many countries, etc., etc. And our ingredients are all fair trade certified if it needs to be. Because if it comes from Germany, you don't per se need fair trade ingredients. One more question.
How do you maintain taking care of the partners and make sure everything's fair trade with the growth demands from a market like the United States?
Come again.
If you're entering the United States, you need to scale up your...
Isn't that more or less the same question as, so you were chatting in the back, huh? So how do you maintain your focus when you're growing this fast? Yeah. Focus on the fair trade work over there. Well, again, it's about being there on the ground. It's about being fair trade certified, so there's a scheme there in itself, and also having external and internal audits constantly.
I think it's a little bit different, maybe, because that's what I heard. How do you scale? Because if you have...
How do you scale? We don't make our own chocolate. Callebaut makes our chocolate. We want a business model that's fully scalable. So we don't make our chocolate in our own backyard, in our own shed, because that's not scalable. Callebaut and Cargill together make 70% of all chocolate in the world. So that's a pretty scalable form. And we have our own dedicated line at Callebaut and at the factories that actually make the bars. So Callebaut makes the couverture, which is liquid chocolate, and these factories make our bars. They add the ingredients. And by having it made in big factories, one, we can scale, but two, we can show that it's a scalable thing to do. And so you can make sustainable chocolate and more responsible chocolate whilst still being able to make a profit.
But you also said it takes a very long time to build up relationships with the farmers.
Yeah.
So now you have 8,000 farmers that you support?
5,000 to 6,000, yeah.
5,000 to 6,000?
Yeah.
If you have to support the US market, you need a whole lot more
Yeah,
farmers.
but we've been growing. We have three pretty straightforward KPIs since the beginning. One is 50% growth year on year. The second is 40% gross margin. And the third is at least 4% net profit, which isn't enough for the banks, but we think it's enough. The 50% growth has been an issue in the beginning, but now that we see that we can constantly grow 50%, we can plan ahead. So we're already talking to corporations in Ghana and Ivory Coast, because there's many more that are fair trade certified already that we can talk to about sourcing our own beans. And yes, it takes a while, so every time you start again with a new process. And that's why, for example, we often get the question, but why don't you put on your own packaging 100% slave-free? Yeah, because we always say together we can make it 100% slave-free, or for a while on our packaging it said towards 100% slave-free chocolate. Why is that? Because if we run into one incident, one tiny incident, it means it's not 100% slave-free. And you now and then run into incidents. And when you hook up new corporations, you have relatively more incidents in the beginning. So you have your longer way to work with them. But yes, it takes a while. And we also, ages ago, we had a year that we had to choose because we were running out of cocoa beans that we were sourcing. And we had to choose, do we stop producing right now? Or do we now buy beans from that mass balance heap of cocoa beans and keep producing? And we chose the latter because we really wanted to be able to keep growing. We don't have that issue anymore. We can now grow within the corporations that we work with because we know we need to hook up new corporations next year and next year and next year. But also because we help them increase the yield. We would rather work with less farmers with a higher yield. So if we can get them from 400 kilos per acre towards 2,000 kilos per acre, we can get this 5 times the amount of beans from the same farmer. One more maybe? I'm on a roll.
You said you want a slave-free chocolate world, but that will be a hard thing to achieve. What is your ultimate goal for Tony Chocolonely?
Again, either 100% of the chocolate world to copy our business model, and we'll happily go do something else, or us reaching 100% market share worldwide. Very simple. Oh. Thank you very much.
I have a last question. Perhaps do you know, perhaps somebody in the audience knows. Do we serve your chocolate on board?
It's even better, and you should know. It's even better. You guys use it as change on the flights. Yeah. So you have the tiny bars. So that's why when I'm flying IPB, I always bring a stack of bars for the crew, hopefully going in front. But you guys sell the little bars, and if you don't have enough change on board, you give the bars as change.
Okay. Nice. So thank you all for coming. When you leave, you can all grab a bar of chocolate. Ynzo, thank you very much. The Orange Pride.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
It didn't fly the other day, did it?
It didn't fly the other day, but we have a special one for you.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
thank you.
It's not in chocolate, but...
no, nice. My son, I'm very happy with it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. All good?
Ja, leuk man.